Welcome back to Coaches at Crown Brew Getting Coffee. I want to wish you all a great week. I hope you've had a great week, and I want to say that we appreciate your support. I want to thank Crown Brew for letting us do this again. I've got Ross and Abby from Swinford Media. Thank you to them for their work and for Bill Swinford allowing us to do this. I want to thank my buddies at Adrenaline Fundraiser for supporting me all those years as a fundraising sponsor, and for helping so many coaches out and programs that need to raise that extra money to take their programs to the next level. I've got a great guest today, and I wrote in my notes, my guest today, I could just call him the voice. This is the first podcast we could do and not show his face at all and just listen to him. It is Mike Reis, and Mike Reis, of course, is the voice of the Salukis for 40 years.
44.
44 years. Saluki baseball, Saluki football, Saluki basketball. Mike Reis, welcome.
It's my pleasure, Kerry. This is impressive, and you're already a pro. You thanked everybody right out of the chute, but you did it early, and so later, if you forgot somebody, you could work it in.
I actually thank him later too.
Boy, coach.
So I want to talk a little bit about obviously your career and your background and so forth, but the accolades and the honors were just so impressive. Obviously, 44 years. Doing 3 sports. You've done national championships, you've done semifinals, you've done NCAA tournaments. I'm going to run through these real quick. Most of the viewers know, but they always remind me that not everyone who's watching knows everything that you know. So I've got, and if I make a mistake, you can correct me. A couple of Sweet 16 NCAA tournaments, 2002, 2007, 9 tournaments overall, 4 Valley championships. These are things you've called. A 1977 College World Series, 4 NCAA baseball tourney bids, 7 Missouri Valley Conference championship seasons, 2005 SIU Hall of Fame inductee, 2006 Basketball Coaches Association Hall of Fame, 2007 SIU Alumni Association Award for Service, 2008 John Sanders Spirit Award for the Missouri Valley Conference, 2008 College of Communication and Fine Arts Commencement Ceremony Speaker and Alumni of the Year, 2010 National Association of Sportscasters and Writers Sportscasters of the Year, 2019 St. Louis Sports Hall of Fame inductee, and 2024 winner of the Woody Durham Voice of College Sports Awards. When I read that, I said, I've got to dress up a little bit.
And you did.
I did.
And you did. I'm impressed.
Wow,
well, thank you for
congratulations.
Thank you for those, for mentioning all those. And, of course, I'm proud of all that. Kerry, a lot of that is longevity.
Sure.
But certainly I don't want to downplay it. I don't want to we all have egos. Some are more humble than others, and I don't want to put my ego out front. But I am very, very appreciative of all the awards, and probably the one that means the most is the latest one, and that's the Woody Durham Award. He did North Carolina forever.
Oh, okay.
And there's a National Sports Media Association, and his son is very, very involved in that. And this is a relatively new award. And one of the qualifications is mentoring of students. And so we have some 70 people who've worked for us in the 44 years, about 2 a year, about 1.5, 2 a year, who are in the business somehow.
Yeah.
We have 3, for example, who are doing Division I radio play-by-play. A 4th was until this year. A 5th is starting a 2-year contract with Fox. And then all the rest of them are in the business somehow. They may not be sports reporters, they may not be sportscasters, but they either run stations, one is part owner of a station, manage stations, or in the communication business in some way. And in the end, that's the longest lasting thing. There's plenty of games I've done, and those championships were fun to do, and some are more important than others, some mean more than others.
Yeah.
But when you have a lot of people in the business, and it comes from a smaller market like Southern Illinois, I'm very proud of that. And I was happy that that was recognized nationally.
That's great. And that's really, for myself in coaching and for you in broadcasting, that's our legacy. Our legacy is what we left in the people that came and worked with us and worked for us. and you mentored well. So I'm glad you explained that because I didn't know what the context of that award was. So that's great. Let's talk about your childhood. You grew up in Cincinnati.
Yes.
So my first thought is,
Well, I was born in Cincinnati.
born in Cincinnati.
I grew up in Cleveland. I lived
Okay.
in Cincinnati till 6, and then 6 to 16. Are you grown up at 16? I grew up in Cleveland from 6 to 16.
That's a fluid situation. Depends on the day, right?
Yes, yes.
Were you involved in sports?
I tried to play,
Yeah.
but lack of talent got in the way. Was maybe a little better in baseball, but not good at anything.
Were you playing in the backyard, and were you broadcasting the games?
Yeah,
Were you
a little bit in my head?
Yeah.
Where I knew I wanted to be a play-by-play announcer is when I was old enough that I was allowed to go to Cleveland Indians games with with friends and not with parents, but with friends, and we would take a bus to downtown Cleveland and go to the games, and I'd look up at the press box and I would see who I thought was the Indian announcers, and I didn't know who they were, but there were people with microphones, and they're just sitting there and they're talking about the game. And I said, "Well, that looks rather docile. I think I could do that."
Yeah.
And I was already listening to a ton of games on a small radio. Like a million people from that generation who were sportscasters, you took a radio to bed and put it under the pillow. And in Cleveland, I could hear KMOX in St. Louis, I could hear Detroit as well as Cleveland, and Chicago. And so I heard a lot of announcers. And so I was bound and determined that that's what I was going to do. And it was simply by looking up there at those people and say, I think I like that lifestyle. And the more I heard about the lifestyle, I really liked it.
Were there certain broadcasters, play-by-play people that you
Jack
really...
Buck and Harry Carey were doing the Cardinals at the time, and KMOX would come in even in Cleveland.
Isn't that crazy
and
how
Buck
far it
was,
reached?
Yeah, it was just amazing. Well, now you can listen to everybody because everybody is streamed. But then I would get quite a thrill about being able to pick them up. And Buck was so precise and could call the play. And when you can be that far away and not be at the game and you can picture what's going on, I really liked it. Radio was more important then. You didn't see as many games on television as we do now. Not even close. You're lucky to see 1 or 2 games a week. So he was it. The Cleveland announcers, they weren't as much impactful, and the teams weren't any good, but they were our team, and so we rooted for them. Cincinnati too, I followed them, and they were generally pretty good, and I took a lot from all of those announcers, but Buck was my hero.
Yeah. A lot of people would say,
yeah.
And the influence of that KMOX is interesting because you meet people from other states that are Cardinal fans. You're like, and then you realize they're Cardinal fans
Where
because
it came from.
You've got people in Arkansas and Oklahoma that say they're Cardinal fans. They don't have a team. The Cardinals is what they could hear on the radio. Why SIU? You end up at SIU going to school. How did that choice come about?
The reason we moved, my father got transferred from the company he was working for in Cleveland, moved him to Chicago with a promotion. I went my first 2 years of high school in suburban Cleveland, Parma, and then went my last 2 years of high school in suburban Chicago in Arlington Heights. And while I was there, my junior and senior year, the guidance counselor, knowing that I wanted to go into radio TV and do sports play-by-play, said Southern Illinois was one of the top 3 in the country in radio TV.
Oh, wow.
And they were at that time. Marquette, and I forget who else were the other ones. And so it was in-state tuition, and that was real popular with the Reis family. And so we climbed on board that one. And what made them good at that time, Kerry, was that they had the equipment. They were current in terms of instructors. They were current in terms of curriculum, and but most importantly, equipment. And they allowed students to do things. And that included sportscasting. And I didn't know that at the start, but at that time they had some sportscasters go through there, and they touted that stuff pretty well. They sold it well, and so it was an easy pick, and it was a great pick because when you start out in the business, you need the opportunity to make mistakes because we're all going to screw up. What level are you going to screw up at?
Yeah.
And if I'm the number 2 person on a college broadcast, I can make my mistakes in anonymity. And so I think that was helpful. It was helpful for all of us.
Yeah.
The competition was fierce at that time to get good jobs. But that's why SIU, they were very good at it.
That's awesome.
And it was a tremendous opportunity. And then you have to do something with the opportunity.
You worked at WSIU while you were a student?
As a student, and then I also worked at WCIL, which is now part of the River Radio group, CIL AM, CIL FM. And they were a legacy full-service station at the time. We did 15-minute sportscasts. At the time, we were trying to be a station of record. It really helped when the newspaper went on strike for a long time, and so people for news had no choice but to come to us, and we delivered that way. And we were all 20 to 22 years old, and so we were cutting our teeth. And the operation, which was key for my entire career, Kerry, was they provided the resources to get it done. And so that's, I did most of my work at CIL, but yes, some at WSIU as a sophomore, and a guy who's in Chicago now. George Hoffman is the guy that gave me a chance, and he really wanted to do Saluki play-by-play. And the station was slow to pull the trigger on that. We did some games, but then he quit. And then because he was just frustrated that they weren't going to do the games. At that time, if you were a radio station, you could do the games if you wanted. There weren't exclusive rights like there are now. And so he left, and then I stepped in. They decided to do the games, and then it was that was a huge break. I had my goal right out of college 2 days after I graduated.
It was something everybody did in the morning. You turned on WCIL,
yeah.
and you listened to the news. They had their own morning show with John Riley, right?
John Riley was the host.
And John Riley would be on there, and you were the sports guy. You guys had great banter.
Mary Jane Dwyer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I loved that, and it was fun. It was local. You know, so much now is brought in from outside.
Sure.
And I remember when they brought in the Stephen D.C. show, and there was outrage because we were losing the local voice. I'll never forget that.
I appreciate you, and John, and Mary Jane has passed.
Oh, she has?
Yes, and almost 15 years ago.
I didn't know that.
And John is in Peoria now, and so we all appreciate that, and it's fun to hear from people. Our ratings numbers were better than our salaries. Our ratings were just huge at that time, and it was really the FM station. The owner had more of an interest in the AM station, and that was his baby, and you didn't touch that.
Oh.
But the FM thing was a new thing, and that band was new. It was relatively unexplored, and he said, well, we'll let the kids have it.
Yeah.
And so we did, and took off, and all of us who worked there, it seemed like, ended up having great careers.
It was great.
Yeah.
We
still hear from people now about that.
Yeah, I hated to see it go. I remember, getting home and telling my wife, I couldn't call her on the cell phone, but I'm like, Tracy, they're getting rid of it. She's like, what?
And John was the key to the whole thing.
He was great.
And he was tremendous, but thank you for remembering that.
So the SIU broadcast job, did you jump into all 3 sports at once?
Yes. Baseball was probably the last one to get on board. Baseball was the most inconsistent of the 3 sports that I did.
Yeah.
It depended on who owned it and things like that. But yeah, it was right away. It was full with that. When I started, there were 4 stations doing the games.
Oh, wow.
And so it was competition.
Yeah.
And that's something that we were proud of too. That we were able to. I think because we put more resources into it, and we could hire better talent and use better equipment. And being on CIL helped us at that time because that was an extremely popular station.
Going from the 3 sports, as you got involved in the 3 sports, it's very different the way you broadcast each of those sports.
Should be.
Did you have trouble at first navigating the difference between a football game and or did that just come natural to you?
That's interesting. And usually when people say, Kerry, that's interesting or that's a good question, it's because they don't have the answer. and that's the case here.
You made it seem easy.
Thank you, but I was a bit of a geek in that socially I like to be around people and everything like that. I enjoy, public stuff. But man, I wasn't afraid to go home and listen. And I listened to a ton of people.
Yeah.
And when you start out in the business, you copy all the good things you've heard from all the announcers you've ever listened to, and what you end up with is a hodgepodge of nothing. Because you're just pulling in, I heard Buck say this, I heard Kerry say this, I heard this guy say this, and I got this, and I got to do this. And the same's true with every sports. My basketball is a lot like Joe Tate, who did the Cleveland Cavaliers forever, beginning when they joined they were an NBA expansion when I was living there. And I was always fortunate that I worked here and he did the games there, because then no one knew I was copying from him.
Yeah.
My football is a lot like a guy who was doing Cincinnati at the time in Phil Samp. And my baseball has a lot of Buck in it. And so that's where I started. And so when you listen to all those games, it's a little bit like and you do games now. And so one of the things you do to prep is you watch video of the team. And so, but what I did at that time was I listened to announcers. It wasn't video or film of games to watch or players to watch, but there were other announcers, and that's what I did. And so I knew that a football game should sound like this. And back to your point that I said was a question that was interesting. I know a football game should sound like this. I know a baseball game should sound like
that makes
this.
sense.
And a basketball.
Yeah.
And so now, like everything else, like whether you're an athlete or a coach, the more reps you get, the better you are at it. And so now I have an idea what basketball should sound like, and the more I do it, the better the product should be.
That makes complete sense to me, though, that you would be able to, in your mind, know what it should sound like based on your experience.
And that's how I judge other ones now, too. What does it sound like? Does it sound like a professional broadcast? So one of the things that I'm very proud of, and one of the I'm confident in this, and I'll tout all of the people and all of it that helped us get this done, because you can't be one person and get it done. We had the resources to do a lot that other people didn't have to do. Kerry, and that includes hiring people and equipment, and so we could do those sorts of things. And I wanted us to sound like we were bigger than Carbondale, that we were bigger than Southern Illinois. That if you were driving down 57 and you turned in the SIU game, you'd say, well, it's Carbondale, it's got to be a bunch of Hicks. And, well, here we go, it's our ball. And so, but I wanted people to tune in and say, man, that's not Carbondale.
Yeah.
And so I think mostly we were able to do that.
I think mission accomplished.
Thank you.
Thank you. What was the state of SIU sports when you started?
Pretty good when I started.
Yeah.
Because 77 had gone to when I was a junior in school, they had gone to the tournament was 32 then, and basketball won the first round, so they went to Sweet 16. 77 baseball had gone to the World Series. 77 football was in its second year with Ray Dempsey, and they had been awful forever, and they won 7 games their first game, took a step back the second year, but it was clear they were pretty good. Gail Sayers, an NFL legend, was the athletic director. They seemed to be flush with money, and that tends to determine their success too. And so things athletically were very good then.
Baseball coach when you got there?
Itchy Jones.
Well, it was Itchy, so I assumed that. So tell me about that era of Itchy Jones baseball and your take on the program under Itchy.
Well, he took a program that was put in the national spotlight by Joe Lutz, who coached them for 3 years and then left to go to the pros. And Itchy came in, and I believe he was 29 years old. He had played there, and he was an excellent player. He was an assistant coach for a year at Southern, and then he took over in 1970. I met him probably for the first time in 76, seriously worked with him in 77. He is my closest professional friend, and he's a very, very, very close. He's up there on the list in the top 5 as a personal friend. He means the world to me because he taught in a disciplined manner, but not an iron-fisted manner,
Yeah.
which marked that time. And even though the coaches and other, whatever other area of life you might have been part of, just because that was the way it was didn't mean it always worked that way or always succeeded. And he had a more compassionate side, but man, you still had to prove yourself. And whether you were working with a dictator or you weren't working with a dictator, you still had to prove yourself. And I always appreciated him for that. He didn't have, he had time for humor, but he didn't have a lot of time for laziness or people that weren't prepared. And so that forced me, that motivated me to be prepared. The other coaches at that time did too. Ray Dempsey,
Sure.
Particularly in football.
Yeah. You know, I have great memories of the Hill, SIU baseball, you know.
You're going to share those? You're going to share those? Let's go,
College
Kerry.
student there. My roommate, Paul Sekia, was a pitcher.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
I know
and
the
so
name.
we grew up together in Salem, and he was a good pitcher on those teams with Robert
Good breaking
Jones and
ball,
some
I
others.
think.
Yeah.
Robert Jones.
He'll be so glad you remembered him. So he's been involved in sports and the athletic director in York, Pennsylvania for years,
okay,
and had a
good.
really good career there as a coach.
That's nice.
But so we had a lot of great memories of you calling games and being on the Hill, and it was a big deal at SIU. you
Robert,
know?
the best player, who was also a cheerleader.
Yeah.
He was. He was
Right.
a home run. He was the home run hero at SIU and the RBI hero at SIU, and just a stud.
He was.
And was a cheerleader too.
I didn't know that.
I thought he was the first male cheerleader ever at Southern, and but
didn't
he
know that.
quickly corrects me.
Oh.
Robert's memory is strong, and
Yeah.
he was the second.
Second,
But those are good memories, and the Hill was it. That's what made it the time. But also, Southern was very good too. Kerry,
Yeah.
at that time,
Yeah.
and they were regular Missouri Valley Conference contenders, and they were championship winners, and it was really fun to do those games. That was the only sport I had an ability to play, so I had an affinity for those players.
Sure.
It seems like I got along with them better, and certainly they treated me the best too. I don't know what that sounds like, but they treated me.
Sure.
I don't want to say the other ones treated me poorly, but maybe because I could converse maybe
I get it.
at a young age better than I could in the other sports.
In basketball, I had to go back and look. I think Alan Van Winkle was there when I went to school, but there was Paul Lambert.
Yes.
Did you broadcast?
He was I did not. I did some games as a student.
I got you.
For WSIU Radio was doing the games at that time. And I covered the team at that time as a reporter.
Joe Gottfried?
Joe Gottfried was the first one.
First one.
78, 79.
And I noticed, they weren't bad teams, but just weren't at the level we think of Saluki basketball.
Well, Joe's were.
Joe's
Gottfried had the 0-16 Valley season in 80-81.
Yeah.
And he took over and he was a fish out of water. He wasn't ready for the job. He was a Division III coach at Ashland, and they brought him in. And he struggled with Lambert's returning players. He struggled with the expectations. He struggled with the recruiting, and they could never get launched. And it really was a mess at that time. And it just never got any traction. The year that they went 0-16 in the league, they went 7-2 in non-con.
Oh wow!
So it was a tough time. He went on to a good career as an athletic director, and his son Mark had a good coaching career, may still be coaching, Mark Gottfried, who had a heck of a playing career at Carterville.
Rich Herron came in I think 1985.
Yeah.
Kind of a big step in a lot of minds at that time, hiring a high school coach.
I'd say.
No college experience, going to
Yeah.
hire a local high school legend to be the head basketball coach. What was your initial reaction to the hire?
I hoped he wouldn't get the job because I didn't want him to get the job. The job was awful, and I thought it would chew him up. I really did.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And I'll
Yeah.
never forget when
Yeah.
I called chasing the story that he was interested. I said, Rich, I hear you want to be Southern's coach, and his answer was, I hope so, big guy.
Of course he did, yeah.
And I said, so we talked and talked and talked. And I said, I don't want you to get it because it's a mess here. And I'm afraid that could be the end of your career. And he said, well, I appreciate that big guy, just don't hurt me.
Probably
I appreciate the advice.
Probably
but don't-
motivated him more than ever.
But don't, well, that's the competitive side of Heron, and that was just intense. He competed at everything.
His first year's 85, 86 season, I believe.
Won 8 games.
Won 8 games. Did you know there was a point where they're turning the corner?
No,
No.
not then.
Not then.
Now I will say this. Now, he said that was the best coaching job he ever did, and then I would say something snide to him about that, and he just wait, get away.
Yeah.
But that team had, he took over the team about at the same time that Southern changed coaches after the 23-24 season and had to put a roster together, and it didn't. The Porter wasn't available then,
Yeah.
and so they really, really struggled. But to get 8 wins and beat Wichita twice was a hell of a thing.
Yeah.
His program, Kerry, did not take off until his 4th year. The first 3 years, he was just kind of stuck in the mud. And he made some difficult coaching staff changes. He fired 2, he hired 2, and he clicked on some recruits, Rick Shipley and Sterling Mahan.
Sure.
And then that launched his program.
Yeah, and boy, they went on a great run. You've got, we talk about, so the tournament bids, how exciting was that when that started happening?
Well, it was a first for me. I'd been around the 77 team, so selfishly, it was a first for me, and I loved it, even though their first game was against Duke. And, Duke was a favorite to win that year. And Duke was a reigning champion in '93, and it was in Chicago. It was in Rosemont, was where the game was. And it's like 17-2 at the first time out here. Duke just, Hurley and Grant Hill and everybody just rips them. And Greg Starrick, who did the games with me then and did for 38 years, leaned over at the first time out and said, Horace, how do you like this NCAA now? Because I was all juiced. You thought I was a player. Yeah. Here's my first NCAA. Woo, it's in Chicago. And it was 17-2, and the game was over, and CBS cut away from the game.
I remember watching that game.
So, but those were tremendous. The three-peat through 93, 94, 95. But the bigger thing for the program in 93, Kerry, was, they had been NIT in 89, 90, 91, 92, and that looked like it was going to be as far as Heron could get them. He could get them to the door, but not get to the quote-unquote big dance. And so it was a pressure relief valve for him when they won the NCAA tournament in 93, and everybody was just happy. And I'll never forget post-game at St. Louis in the Valley tournament after Southern had won, and just what a ruckus it was on the floor, and people celebrating and people just happy, and him just being happy, and then they repeated in 4 and 5. Couldn't get the first round win, which is how you were judged at that time, and I guess still judged now. Yeah. But that was probably the most fun. The championships after that were fun, but it was a little bit more of a business then, and I was a little older then. But in 93, what was I, 36 years old at that time, and so I still felt like I was pretty young, and it felt pretty new.
Do you have a favorite team among that era?
It would have to be 02. 93, 4 and 5. 95 should have won the first round of the tournament. They went to Texas, lost to Syracuse. Yeah. Gave up like 91 points and lost, and they scored like 90.
Oh, wow.
And so that was frustrating, and all of that stuff. So the Heron teams, 95 would be the team I liked the most, in part because it was the most talented. Timmons, Carr, Shane Hawkins was a freshman, Paul Lusk. After that, of all the teams, the 02 team was the best team I think I was around. 07 was an awfully good team that's still mad they didn't make the Final Four that year. 02, because it was the first on that, the NCAA was much more of a national thing in 02 than it was in 93, 4, and 5.
Right.
So that's why it has a different place, and maybe I put it on a different level because they were exposed at a higher level, or a bigger level, and so that's why I side with 02. That's Kent Williams and Jermaine Dearman, and 07 is Tony Young and Jamal Tatum. And,
Love those names, man. It brings back a lot of memories. That was a lot of fun.
Sure does.
It does. The Bruce Weber era.
Yes.
5 seasons.
Yeah.
He took what Rich had done, and
Yes.
and then. So what do you remember about the Bruce Weber?
He made Rich kept us as a Division I program. I think that if I had to encapsulate those coaches and or what I took from those coaches, excuse me, I would think Southern's money troubles, Kerry, in the mid '80s were much more severe than they are now. Now I think more people know about them, but it was really difficult in the mid '80s, and or mid '90s. And I think if Herron's program doesn't succeed, then I think Southern's Division II now. I think it was at that point. I don't think they could continue to fund everything that they were doing at the level they were doing it if basketball continued to labor. So once he got it going in the late '80s, then I think Southern was able to move on. Bruce Weber modernized the Division I program at Southern.
Yeah.
He took the things that, Herron was, he would duct tape this, he would duct tape, it was Southern would fly at the time, and even when they had a charter flight, which he got later in his SIU coaching career, instead of taking a bus on the road, they'd take cabs. So those are the little things. And where would you have your pregame meal and those sorts of little things, uniforms, all that other stuff. You got Adidas in there, got Reebok in there at the time, which helped them get equipment. Weber took that to a higher level.
Yeah.
And at that time, Herron struggled. That program, the success of the SIU Radio guide tends to be determined by the success of the basketball program, I think. And just like the university is. And it's no different when you're the broadcaster. And so I was feeling a little stale when Weber took over, but he rejuvenated my career, not just with the success.
Sure.
We're close friends now. I think there was an element of trust and respect between the two of us, and so he played an awfully huge role in my career. Still does as a person. We're close friends still.
Matt Painter for a year.
Yes, smartest basketball person I've ever met.
Yeah. Oh, really?
Oh, easily.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Interesting. And then couldn't keep him.
No.
The SIU level, success can be.
You could have a discussion whether they should have been able to keep him the second year, and if it's anybody but Purdue, they do.
Right.
But Purdue wanted him to help.
Yeah.
Gene Katie's last year,
Sure.
and that's a way to ease out a legend.
Yeah.
And so it made total sense. I understood why Matt did it. I think if it became a bidding war and it was anybody else, I think Southern would have won.
Yeah. Chris Lowry takes over.
Yes.
And kind of a up and down era for Chris. I mean, there was expectations to continue that success, and he did for a while.
Yeah, 5, 6, 7, and 8 were fine.
Yeah.
Southern was so good. And I also would throw in arrogant, because I think we all did. We all got a little arrogant. We all got a little cocky. Now you're looking down your nose at your opponents a little bit because you're a little full of yourself. But his 5, 6, and 7 teams were really good. And Southern was so good then that when they took a step back to the NIT and we said, well, if we'll go NCAA 6 straight, every 6 out of 7's all right.
Yeah.
Well, they haven't sniffed it since.
Yeah.
Since 2007. And so he had the highs and the lows. Southern's basketball program has had little success without Chris Lowry. If you look at him as a coach and a player and head coach, assistant coach, player, when Southern's been really good, he's been part of it, but the end was not good.
It was not.
And it struggled, and he will take the blame on that. And when it changed and when it got good, then Southern tried to be something that it couldn't, in my opinion, Kerry, and paid a price for it. They tried to, Southern was winning all those games, and it was 55-52. And the impression nationally was you only liked watching Southern play if you were a fan. And so, and I remember even asking Lowry this question several times. What if you clearly can teach defense, what if you got offensive recruits and you scored 10 to 15 more points per game, you might give up 5 to 10 more because they're offensive players, but you'd still win and you'd beat Gonzaga, Gonzaga was in its infancy at that time, and could you be like them? And I think Chris took the bait, tried to do that without the experience and ability to do that. Yeah. And so now he got offensive players, it became a mess, and they didn't win. So that's tough. I have the world of respect for him, but it was the right move at the time to make the change because they had gone from so good and taken the dive.
Yeah, and it's always tough to be in that situation for any coach. And I have a heart for guys that go through that downward trend, and someone has to pay a price for that.
Yes,
because the expectations are a certain way. I'm gonna jump ahead to football real quick because in '83. SIU football wins a national championship. Yes. You broadcast that game.
Yes.
It was a huge deal, and it kind of, from what I understand, is it kind of came out of nowhere. Like they had been better, but all of a sudden they get really good.
Well, the coverage wasn't as intense then. We all knew that Southern had really, really good players, and at that time, Southern had just moved from. What's the terminology I can use now that the most people understand? Well, now Southern plays at the FCS level, which is just below the FBS level.
Yeah.
At that time, Southern had just moved from the FBS level down, but they kept all their players. Now, when you move, if you made a move like that, you could lose all your players anyway.
Right.
To the portal. But then all the players stayed. They weren't happy. Neither were the coaches. But they stayed, and now they're all juniors and seniors in '83. They knew they were really good. They didn't say much about a national championship on the exterior, but they did on the interior.
Did you hear that?
Yeah, no, I didn't. They were very good about that. I knew enough of the players to know that they thought that they were really good, but to think that you were national championship material, in part because I didn't know how good the other teams were. Southern won the national championship that year, but didn't win the league. So I guess I say that in defense of not really knowing, what they were capable of doing. They lost the final game of the regular season, where they would have gone 11-0, and then that motivated them in postseason. Losing motivated them in postseason, and they just rolled in postseason.
I liken that to, I said this to someone the other day, and I could be wrong, but I felt like Ohio State's Michigan loss made them a better team. Yeah. And I think Ohio State played angry with a certain motivation that I didn't see in the regular season. I can't prove that, of course, but I feel like they were a little bit played with an edge, I should say.
I would think the same thing about Ohio State from a distance too, Coach. And I think that's why I think then you have an appreciation for how Southern played in the postseason that year. Those 3 games weren't close. And they had the best defense Southern will ever have. Dempsey said, who was the coach at the time, Big Ten officials worked the semifinal game at Carbondale. And they said that after watching Southern beat Nevada, what was Nevada-Reno then is Nevada now, they thought Southern would have finished 4th in the Big Ten that year. That's the year that Illinois won and went to the Rose Bowl. And Southern wanted to play Illinois in the worst way.
That year,
they spouted it.
They
talked a lot about that. They could talk tough because they knew it wasn't going to happen. But they tied for the championship, and they wanted to play Tulsa too. Tulsa only played who they wanted to, even though they were in the Valley. And if they didn't want to play you, the Valley agreed. You didn't play everybody. And so, the offense worked with such a short field all the time. Southern had 8 interceptions in the championship game, Kerry.
I didn't know that.
And one guy had 3.
That Terry Taylor?
No, Ship.
I'll be darned.
Greg Ship. And so it was just, it was an incredible defensive team. You couldn't move the ball on them. And Taylor, though, led the way. He's the best football player I've ever seen at Southern.
My research came up with a fascinating fact before I move on from that. SIU began playing football in 1913.
Yes, I didn't do those games. before you say that.
Tell me about that team. And it said, I don't know if this is true or not, it said their first win came against Anna High School.
Yeah, I'll bet.
That's fascinating.
Wouldn't you like to know that?
I didn't know
The guy that started the program, William McAndrew, for whom the old stadium was named, when he died, there was, he was the architect of the program. In today's world, that would be like Mike Krzyzewski dying. That would be like when Dean Smith died. It would be everywhere in a hurry.
Yeah.
Southern Illinois, and the day after, I think it was like 2 days after McAndrew died, it's like 2 inches on the front page, Coach McAndrew passed.
Wow.
Funeral arrangements are pending. You know, and so it was just a hugely, but they would play the Heron Elks. You know, and now you think about it, I can think some of those guys putting on a.
When I read it, I couldn't wait to ask you. Like, that can't be right. So we won't go through all the coaches, but I know we had Bob Smith and Ray Dorr.
A lot of coaches.
Yeah, a lot of coaches. Sean Watson.
Did you apply ever?
I did not.
Heron didn't inspire you?
No. Jan Corliss.
Yes.
And my first question for you about Jerry Kill is, was Jerry Kill the last coach SIU was going to hire?
If he didn't succeed,
That's what I mean.
I believe
That's
so.
what I mean.
Yes, because they had to do something to McAndrew.
There were rumors, of course, that they were going to the program. They're just rumors, among the coaching community that SIU was going to fold the program, and that Jerry Kill would be the last attempt at building a winner. And he was not a name guy. No one knew who he was. His background was from schools that a lot of people don't recognize. And he came into a place whose facilities weren't great, weight room and so forth, that might be up to par compared to the people. Yeah. But he did it.
Yeah. He, the U and the scuttlebutt at the time was exactly right. It probably had 2 years to do it, and were awful the first year, 1-10, then went 4-8. But you would have thought they were national champions because they had a win against Western Illinois, who they had lost 18 straight years to.
Yeah.
And Western was really good.
They were.
And it looked like Southern now had a program and had a coach. You could tell right off the bat that Kill had been a head coach, and Southern had been through a bunch of assistants prior to that as head coaches.
Oh, that's interesting.
Southern also didn't support football worth a hoot. The administration didn't. Corliss, Kill's predecessor, I believe, had 47 scholarships at the end. You could have 63. So the support was lacking. Paul Kowalczyk was the athletic director who hired Kill, and he upped the investment in the program. And
was that a Jerry Kill demand?
Sure.
Yeah.
But I think at the start it was Kowalczyk.
Gotcha.
And a key move was to change Southern's schedule his third year. And Southern was to play Eastern Illinois at Eastern when Tony Romo was their quarterback, and they were to play at Toledo, which was winning the MAC. And Kill got with Kowalczyk, and they had to buy their way out of those games, and added like West Virginia Tech and somebody else.
Yeah.
So now all of a sudden they win some games, they feel like they have some confidence, and then they win the league in 2003.
Yeah.
The Valley, then the Gateway, was not as tough of a league as it is now.
Right.
But no one saw them go from worst to first. And they had been such a long, the 80s, from 84 to 2001 was just awful. And 84 to 99 was especially awful for Saluki football. So all the credit in the world to Kill for getting players who he could coach, guys with a chip on their shoulder who thought they should be at the higher levels, the right JUCO, running game, hard-nosed, lunch pail, and he made himself, not only did he win, Kerry, but he endeared SIU football to outside Jackson and Williamson counties. And Southern's attendance grew, interest just shot up, and largely because people in Franklin County, people in Union County felt like they could identify with him.
I agree.
And he made it a point to be around them. He also genuflected in front of SIU basketball, where his predecessors tended to fight it in the university's funding of basketball versus football. And they underfunded football. But Kill thought, why would I fight that? I'm going to try to use that. It became he was recruiting at a great time to bring players to campus and see great SIU events in terms of basketball and fans and all that other stuff.
So he used that as a selling
But back
point.
to the original point, if they had a legitimate and safe stadium at that time, they could have dropped to Division II. But there was no will and no money to build a new stadium, and they had done all they could to McAndrew to keep it upright. And had they not won, then there would have been no support to build any kind of a new stadium at any level. And so I believe they would have dropped it, yes.
Had a great era of running
Oh, it
backs.
really was. Running backs, sure.
Just came in one after another.
And football mattered.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't a countdown to basketball.
2007 semifinal game.
Yes. Yeah.
Huge deal.
Yeah. It was a hell of a game.
Joe Flacco.
Joe Flacco.
Yeah.
Still playing.
Yeah, how can you believe that?
Nick Hill said, had Southern won that game, he felt he would have been drafted.
Ah,
I think he'd been told that.
Yeah.
Because not so much that he would have beaten Flacco, who was an obvious draftee,
Yeah.
but because it would have put him in the next game and would have exposed him to more scholarships, would have more scouts.
Yeah.
And so personally, that's what, and he was Southern's quarterback at the time. That was the effect that it had on him. But that was a terrific team, and would be number 2 on my list after the '83 team.
Nick Hill era. I mean, quickly, that's how you ended your broadcast career with the Nick Hill era. You see similarities between what he got from Coach Kill into what he's done in his program?
A little bit.
Differences?
A little bit. The running, especially later in his career, the importance of running, I don't think that was always there from Nick early. But I think when Kill was the athletic director for a short time while Nick was the coach, I think Nick had the opportunity to hear daily about the importance of running the ball. And another guy by the name of Carl Mock, who was awfully important to Kill, was around too.
Yeah.
And Mock never met a running play he didn't like. And so, I think so. I think Hill is appreciative of the things that Kill provided. There's so many things behind the scenes that are important to your football program being good at the college level. Summer scholarships for players that need the time, and now you have them there for summer practice because they're in school.
Sure.
And so, much like Weber, the stature of the program rose. They traveled better. It wasn't a rush to the worst hotel in the town because they had the most rooms. And so I think Nick benefited from that. And then of course, he coaches in a beautiful stadium.
Facilities. The weight room is
the weight room is
phenomenal. The student center where they study.
Where they lack now is assistant coaching salaries.
Yeah.
And there's probably some other areas, but it is a much better funded program now than it was.
You mentioned Coach Mock. I'll never one quick story about him. I was at some practices and so forth, and he would always have a conversation. I had gone to the shotgun spread offense, the air raid offense, and evidently he knew that. And so he walks up and he says, "Coach Martin." I said, "Yeah, Coach." He goes, "You still running that chuck and duck offense?" So he would give me heck every time. "You got to run the ball, son." I go, "I do run the ball." You know? I told him, we spread the field to run the ball better. I said, he didn't buy it. He didn't like that shotgun thing, man.
No, he didn't.
I'm going to talk to you about some broadcasting stuff, and these are just to finish up here.
Sure.
Facilities.
Yes.
I bet you broadcasted some crazy places.
Yes,
Yeah.
good and bad.
You have a favorite place to broadcast from?
I haven't thought about it. When Creighton was in the league, that was my favorite.
Okay.
The league now, Drake is, simply because of your priorities change. Now I like space. I don't like the cramped. When I started, they were in tiny gyms, Robertson Fieldhouse at Bradley. Even the arena at the time was tiny because we broadcast upstairs and you were shoulder to shoulder. Illinois State was tiny. I like the space. I like the space now. Football in Northern Iowa is my favorite because of the view.
Yeah.
Football, I like the view, is important. Baseball, Hammonds Field at Springfield is really nice. Peoria has a very nice place to broadcast from, but Bradley has very few fans, so it's not atmosphere. When Dallas Baptist was in the league, that was my favorite place. But your favorite places tend to be places with space and fans.
Do I even ask you the worst conditions? Someone told me
Macomb is the worst in football.
Okay.
Sorry if I hesitated.
No, that's a
yeah, I was sorry I hesitated.
So someone said that SEMO's old stadium was a strange place to broadcast from.
But you know what? The people there are great, so I didn't mind that as much. Plus, you can fall out of bed and be there in like 40 minutes.
Well, yeah,
so if you're going to
if
you're going to play a road game. But Western Illinois is the worst. The space is about the size of this table, and Valparaiso has the worst in basketball.
Do they know that?
Yes, they do.
I was wondering if they're aware of that.
Yeah. Well, everybody complains to them, and then they don't do anything about it. So apparently,
is it bad for the home broadcasters as well?
Same
oh,
thing.
okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
You sit at a table on a riser that you feel like you could fall off.
I gotcha. Best part of broadcasting, and in your career, what was your favorite part? Was there something that this is why I want to do this?
At the time, it was the games, and it was. I just loved the business. I wanted to be, and radio was the preferred medium. So I liked the importance of the position. I liked the fact that I felt we had a lot of people listening, and they still do now. And we still did at the end and all that other stuff. But that's what made the most difference to me. And then, of course, good teams always matter. I didn't learn that until later in my career that in the end, good teams determine whether you have good listenership. And but now now when I look back, the things I remember most are the people. Now when I don't have anything to do, I'm going to reconnect with the people that I met doing the games. Like at the end of January, I'm going to go to Creighton, and I know a lot of people there, and that was my favorite trip then. And so I'm looking forward to seeing them for the first time since they left the league. So it's the people. I go to Southern's games still. I'm still a season ticket holder. I'm still
tonight.
A donor. Going on the night that we tape this. But I don't know what to do with myself at games, really. I'm not entirely confident. When I'm sitting there, I say, God, I wish I was doing this game, and I do a little of it in my head. But look, it's the people. It's a people business, and whether it's the players or the coaches that I had the privilege of broadcasting, that's what I remember now.
Such a great answer. Challenging part?
Oh, when the team isn't good, when the team stinks.
And you got to make something.
Well, in the end, you can't lie.
Yeah.
I think in the end, if you're honest, if you have some credibility, I think if you do it in a professional way, I don't think you can ignore the fact. I remember I got to drive my hero around Southern's campus. Only met Jack Buck a couple times, and he came to speak on ethics at SIU. And so they asked me to drive him around that day, and I did in his Cadillac. And so my voice was probably still squeaking then, and I said, Mr. Buck, what do you, and this was in the midst of the 80-81 season where Southern went 0-16. I said, what do you do when your team stinks? And he said, be better than the team. And I thought, I thought, you know what? So I've remembered that. But those are the hardest times, and that was my worst year because, you know, you had fans come up to you, why did you tell Gottfried to quit? On your post-game show, why don't you ask him, when are you going to quit, Joe? I said, well, then what do I ask at the second question after he gets up and walks away? That's not going to work. And so, you know, trying to balance that, it was miserable to be the voice of the Salukis then, but I had no experience at that. I think that's what I mean, there's times where the equipment doesn't work, but that I got hot at then that seems so trivial now. But I would think, Kerry, when the team, and when you know you're not good, when you haven't done your job well, and you know why. And the longer you do it, the more you're aware of that. And so I would say those two things are the things that make it toughest for you.
About the travel?
Not really. I didn't bother. I've been to Terre Haute enough. I've been to Macomb enough. But really, I like all of it. And probably that changed when I came to the realization that it's a people business. and so when I went to those towns, I was seeing good people, and so I forget about, I could do without driving in ice and snow anymore, and that stuff, or whether it's 100 degrees and the press box isn't air conditioned. But I realized I was going to see people that I liked, and we helped a lot of towns' economies, Kerry. So our game prep the night before was we helped the economy, and I missed that part too.
You had to build trust with the coaches.
I hope so.
You're at practice, you are at games, you're broadcasting, you're telling the story. There has to be an element where you're able to build trust with coaches, right?
Not always. Coaches are, this may surprise you, coaches are a little peculiar.
Really?
Even at the college level.
Yeah.
I know at high school they're all perfect.
Oh, man, are they ever? No, there's no strange ones.
Yeah, that's why Rude still coaches. Been around forever.
That's right.
And my God, he's not going to go out of style.
No, never.
He's not going to go out of style at all.
Never.
I still remember Rude from when I first started. I felt that this is where I think the business is different. I think now a lot of announcers feel like they're doing the games for their bosses. And I think that in radio, that means you are hired either by the university itself or you are hired by an arm of the university like Learfield is for SIU. And that's who I worked for my final 15 years. And so, but I grew up as a reporter. And so my eyes were focused on reporting. And I believed that we were doing the games for the fans. I know that sounds corny.
No.
I know that people can find the holes in that, and I'm not saying that. There's only one time I know I lied, Kerry, in the 44 years. Now, if I did early in my year, I don't remember that now, but that I knew, what do you mean by lie, Reis? I didn't say what I knew. And I don't want to get into that now. I'd rather that stay a secret.
Sure.
But I'm proud of the fact that that's it. Because if you're going to do it for the fans, then you got to have the information. Why isn't Kerry Martin playing tonight? Or if you're coaching and you were ill or whatever, or why isn't so-and-so playing? Is he suspended? Is he ill? Is it this? Or why is this happening? Why isn't so-and-so starting? Why isn't, there's always a reason.
Sure.
And it isn't always for violation of team rules, which is the throwaway comment, or people don't say anything at all.
Yeah.
I figure if you're there for the fans, that you better get that information, and the only way you're going to get that information is that people trust you.
Yeah.
And what do they trust? Your ability to say it without lynching the athlete or the coach or the program.
Well, I was going to
Can I say it and not belabor it?
I was going to ask you that the reason I asked about the trust factor is that ability to be honest.
Yes.
And that honesty comes out as criticism.
Yes.
And that criticism hurts someone's feelings. And then the trust element, did it ever change where what you said may have been completely...
No, because I think, I'm sure, I'm not perfect. I'm sure I've screwed something up for what I said. And, but I think every time there was controversy, people knew what I was going to say. Because I wasn't going to start a broadcast and guess. Because that makes me look unprepared.
Yeah.
And I felt like we had established enough that people expected us to know the answer.
Yeah.
And I'm a big believer that information, look, I'm sympathetic with players and coaches when there's stuff that's embarrassing, but I think if you say it and you don't belabor it and the information's out there, in the long run, everybody's better off by the information, even though they think immediately I've got to run to the player's defense or the coach's defense in order to keep them from being embarrassed. And an example would be if a player didn't play because he was late to practice. The first reaction is, don't say it. I can hear the coach.
Yeah.
I don't want to say it. Well, all right. I don't say anything, and then somebody says, well, Smith was arrested last night. That's not fair to Smith.
Right.
So yeah, it's embarrassing for 24 hours.
Sure.
And then, especially if he's a good player and you keep
Yeah.
winning, people are going to forget about it. That's just the reality of the whole business, the reality of sports, where your forgiveness equals your record. And so we battled on those things quite a bit and had to what's the word I'm looking for? We had to agree to disagree. We had to compromise on
Sure.
some occasions, but I was pretty adamant about that, and I'm proud of that. And I don't feel like, I don't feel like I violated any trusts, and the only time I feel like I let the fans down was that one time. And so I'm pretty proud of that. But there are plenty of things I would take back.
Well, listening to you for so long, I mean, I always felt like I was getting what was really happening, and I felt like,
Well, thank you.
and
That
I
was
do,
key.
and I felt like it was an honest take without going too far one way or too far the other. And I know that you're a fan first and foremost as much as anybody, but at the same time, your honesty is connected to your credibility.
Yeah, and why would I? A couple times people would say, "Well, you want them to lose." No, I don't want them to lose.
Yeah.
Why would I want them to lose?
Yeah.
Are you going to listen if they lose? No. Then you wouldn't be able to find out if I wanted them to lose. So why would I do that? And I'm not going to do that.
Well, I appreciate that honesty, because that's a kind of a deep question, but I appreciate.
But yet
that
I
honesty.
would take. There are some things that I said I would take
Sure.
back, and I've told those people, and told them generally afterwards what I said, because the 5 worst words in my business were, "You know what I heard." Because when somebody starts with that, I want to go to the fetal position, Kerry, because I think that somebody's about to tell me something that somebody did that ought to land them in federal prison for 34 years.
Yeah.
And as it turns out to just be gossip, and it's nothing.
Yeah.
And that's why I hate that stuff, and that's why I fought so hard to get the right info out there. And I didn't know everything, I didn't say everything, but I think the most important things I said something about.
Yeah. So what led the decision to step away?
It was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
I was going to do it after the 22 season, but I was mad at everybody at that time. And so I decided I don't want to go out mad. And so I did the 22-23 season. I had only told 3 people, my 2 brothers and Joel Sambursky, who handles my money, and those were the most important people. And I said, we're going to come back. I'm going to come back in 22-23. And I'm glad I did. The passion left me a little bit. That's all I've done for 45 years, and left me a little bit. My memory isn't what it was. Nothing serious. I don't have any health issues I'm disguising, and I tell my doctor about it, and he tells me to shut up. That I'm no different than any other 68-year-old. But that mattered to me, and it mattered to what I felt like we were producing. And I always wanted to be. I didn't want people whispering, saying, "Well, you know what? He was really good back in the '90s, but he stinks now." And so I didn't want to do that, and it was the right thing. And look, when you lose the passion a little bit for the job I was doing, and you can afford to step down, which I could, then I think you should do it.
Well said. I can echo those same words in my own decision. Not wanting to be whispered about, when is he going to step down,
Right.
And as I talked to Kerry Blaylock and others who've been on here who've retired, there's almost a thread of the same answer. I just knew it was time. Yeah. Well, I thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate your interest. Always
good
to be around you.
No, you need to be part of this, and you are part. You're not a coach necessarily, but you are part of this profession and this whole experience in Southern Illinois, and your voice is distinct, the most familiar voice maybe in Southern Illinois history, and I'm honored you said yes. I've spent my first year in the broadcast booth, and I have so much respect for how good you were at what you did, because you're right, those words come out and they're so regrettable sometimes you can't get them back. So I appreciate it, and I appreciate everything you've done. You've always been a great source of encouragement when I would go to practice and see you there, and you never left without a dig or two. And so I remember that.
To be known for that.
That's awesome. No, I needed it. But I wish you well, and continued enjoying your retirement and meeting up with those people
My career ends as yours starts.
Yeah, well, I don't know if it's a career.
Congratulations. I appreciate you thinking
But
of me to
it's-
begin with and to
Yeah.
be prepared as you were. That means the world to me. I enjoyed the time.
I'm so glad you said yes. Thanks again. I want to thank you for watching and listening, and thanks to Abby and Ross and Swinford Media for Crown Brew, and my buddies at Adrenaline, Matt and Jeff. So we look forward to seeing you again next time on Coaches Getting Coffee at Crown Brew. Thanks.